right, everybody, welcome back to Philosophy for the People. Dr. Tim has finally returned for our next
I'm back.
of Freaky Friday, baby. And we're going to talk about death. We're going to talk about transhumanism and freaky human cyborg things, all that awesome cyberpunk stuff that I'm oddly into.
Yes.
And then we're going to take all of your questions, gentle listeners.
We'll do it.
In the second half of this episode.
We'll do it. Or the questions we deem interesting.
Yeah, we're a little picky and choosy here. Yeah, dude, it's been a while. I've been apologizing on your behalf to the audience. I let them know that you've just been tied up with many different obligations, but that you still love them. I assured them.
It was not for lack of love.
And then we had a philosophical problem. People started saying it's the problem of Jim hiddenness. How do we? does he really love us? Right?
Does he? How can we know if he doesn't manifest? Right.
Right. Yeah.
But I was always there.
He was always there. He was always willing your good.
Now you can see all along I was there.
Right? That's exactly it, man.
No, we had a 3-day weekends in a row for the regional and the state wrestling tournament for my son Patrick, and then midterms hit, and it's one of those like rare weeks where I actually kind of have to like go to work, right?
Yeah.
So
real shame.
Yeah, I'm shame, right? But now it's back, and then there was my wife had some work kind of travel stuff going on, so the homeschool duties were shift a little bit, but here it is. It's Friday of spring break, man.
Dude, yes.
Party.
Time to get super freaky. So you sent me a paper, and I'll admit, I have to admit to the professor, I didn't actually do my homework this time. I did a little skim. I'm sure you're sick of hearing that from your students. So I got the gist of what's going on here, but you're going to lead this conversation.
Yeah, we're going to talk about it.
And give us a little background. This is something that you've given to your students. Is that correct?
Yeah, let me get my page here real quick.
Yeah, sure.
And I don't know how. I'm not going to probably work closely through the text or anything.
No, that's fine. We'll just
because like when the audience hasn't read it, but I want to call the audience's attention to Hans Jonas, the author of this. Okay, and this is it's from a collection of his essays called Mortality, Immortality: A Search for God After Auschwitz. Okay, one of a number of very important books by Jonas, at least very important books to me. And another text of his I would highly recommend is a monograph, the Phenomenon of Life. Okay, very, very, very interesting text. And those of you who have read my Problem of Evil paper, Jonas plays a role in the back half of that big time. Okay, the essay that I've been working through with my students is The Burden and the Blessing of Mortality. Okay, and I think, when Jonas is writing this, I think about 50 years ago, 60 years ago. I mean, maybe not quite that long, but he's writing it a ways back.
And what is his philosophical background?
So, about Jonas, an interesting human being. So he was a Jew, a German, who was studying under Heidegger in the 1930s. Right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so he has to split and he, when fun kicks off the last time in Europe, and ends up spending the war fighting in like an all Jewish commando unit, right? Like was a combat veteran himself. I think he actually went back to fight in the wars establishing Israel after the war. Okay. And then eventually completes his doctoral work. I'm not sure where, but I think he spends most of his career then in America after the fact. Okay. So he's a phenomenologist. And I think in a lot of ways, if you kind of want to look, you want to see what existential phenomenology of the German type looks like without the fascism, right? It's Hans Jonas, right?
It's so funny, man. In marketing, they teach you when you want to come up with good headlines, just do like the thing you like without the thing that sucks.
There it is.
Phenomenology without fascism.
Yeah. Yeah,
there's a book title. There's a headline.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you find it also in Merleau-Ponty and Sartre, right? Especially Merleau-Ponty. It's an anti-fascist phenomenology. Okay, whereas Jonas he's trained by Heidegger, right? Like, and it's interesting. Like a lot of Heidegger's like best students were Jews. Okay, and then they, their relationship to the boss after the war is interesting. And Jonas is very critical of Heidegger after the war.
Sure.
Okay. So he's this interesting figure as a human being, right? A scholar, a guy who fought in commando units, right? Like I'm told was like into the arts and things like that. So he's an interesting human being. And I think if a lot of you want, and in a lot of his essays and the stuff that's available from is fairly non-technical phenomenology. Okay, so it's pretty accessible. So I think a
What I
lot of
read
you
was very straightforward and
straightforward.
very well written.
Yeah, very well written. And so I think if you're looking for like those of you who are like kind of afraid of dipping your toe into the obscurantism of continental philosophy, right? Though they say that about analytic philosophy because it depends what your mother tongue is, right? But those of you who are looking to dip your toe into the obscure world of continental philosophy, a very good entry point is Hans Jonas.
Good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
that's great. Let's get into the theme and the text. Yeah.
So I find okay, so this essay, I'm not like I said, I'm not going to read it closely. The burden and the blessing of mortality is Jonas is making a case in here why like mortality is, I mean, and not only a burden, that's the easy part, but it's a blessing, right? And in fact, really what he's going to argue is all that we can recognize as a good in human life or life at all presupposes mortality. Okay. And something like the transhumanist question is being raised towards the end of the text, right? And you can see what he's trying to say is we should shun the notion of a quantitative natural immortality. Okay. So he's not making a case about an afterlife one way or another, though he's a fairly traditional Jew is my understanding. So that's not really his trip, right? He's not necessarily looking to that.
But you know what? That is a really important point. This is why I think if there is a really tenable view of the afterlife philosophically,
you
really think about what the afterlife would have to be for it to be worthwhile, I guess, right? I think it would have to include something like theosis, right? It would have to be a radical shift. It's not just like we come back and then we just have an infinite quantitative measure of days after that in the sort of same mode of being that we are. There has to be a transfer of a mode of existence, if that makes sense, right?
If it's just this, like this guy forever, it's not that interesting to me.
Right. Yeah, and like some of these are like the classic objections, like, won't you get bored in heaven? Well, I guess if you think of heaven that way, sure, but that isn't how I think the greatest minds have thought about heaven. Anyways,
exactly. So what Jonas wants to do is he wants to look at first, what does it mean for something to be alive? Okay, and like what distinguishes the living thing from
metabolism, professor. I got that one.
Yeah, you got that, right?
And then I thought, well, what about angels? They don't have a metabolism.
Yeah, but I mean,
I know this is me just being a petty.
No. I mean, you got Aristotle talks about God being a life, right? Okay, and I think though what Jonas is going to say that sort of thing is going to say, well, we have to begin with what is best known, right? And get our notion of what life is from what we know better, and we know it best in like the organism, right?
Yeah, right.
So at least for the organism to be alive, right? This is how he thinks it has to go, right? And he gives an interesting, almost hylomorphic type argument in this, where he says if you take a stone is in no sense, he says, free from its physical constituents, right? The stone is just exactly identical to its physical constituents.
Yep.
Okay.
I read this part.
Yeah, good. And so the upside of that for the stone is that the stone, it's perfectly stable, right? He says it shows up and it's there, right? And there's no question of its being, leaving aside like, first cause questions, right? There's no question of its being from one moment to the next, right? It doesn't have to earn its keep in reality, right? It just shows up and it's there. Okay. The living thing, Jonas argues, all living things, not just us, not just higher animals, but all living things, he says, have a kind of freedom from their physical parts.
That's right. Yeah, he has a nice little way of claiming constitution is not identity, at least for living things. Yeah.
It's not identity. It's interesting. And he sees constitution is a kind of freedom, right? In that, like, I am not tied to this set of bodily parts, right? I can lose some and be what I am, because what I am is not the parts, right? It is the process of exchange of parts with the environment.
Right. So
you see that?
So sex change operation isn't gonna.
Yeah. Well, it could keep me, right? You know what I mean? Well, there's questions about that, right? But you see, like what he's up to is to say is like organisms he actually says it in the piece. It says an organism, or the being of an organism, is its doing, right?
Yeah,
Like
action follows being sort of
action
theme
follows
going
being,
on.
yeah. And the idea is like an organism has to achieve its being. It has to be self-caused in a way. It has to do something to keep itself being what it is, right? Okay, and there's a liberation to that, right? Because now there's all sorts of possibilities open to the organism that aren't open to the non-organic, right?
Yeah.
But there's also a downside because it can go wrong, right? It doesn't like the process doesn't have to work out. Like you have to achieve your being, but but there's no guarantee it's there's going to be like the right nutrients floating by the protozoa.
That's right, because
Yeah,
there's the contingent circumstances that it's still dependent
yeah,
upon, as he
yeah.
emphasizes, right?
So he says like what's distinctive of the organism is needful freedom. We have needful freedom, that we can separate ourselves from our constituents. We're free. We're not just our parts, right? But that freedom is needful. It requires us to now go out and like earn our living and being in a way that inorganic things do not have to do, right? Okay, and so you can see then. So what he's saying is, baked into the very cake of being alive at the simplest levels, right, is the possibility of death. Like to be alive carries with it the possibility of death, right? To have the freedom of life inherently carries with it the needs, right? But to say it's a need is to say it's something that could fail to be fulfilled. So
Yeah.
it's the very possibility of organic success entails the possibility of organic failure.
Yeah. So he's
right?
really saying you can't have organic life without the possibility of organic death.
Death,
Right.
exactly, right? And what I love what and this is he's then says is like to be an animal, or not the animal, to be alive is to be concerned, right? It's to have interests. It is to be such that things don't have to work out for you, and it's on you now, right, to keep pushing to make it happen. Right? There's a concernfulness, and you can see what he's doing here is he's building consciousness into life itself, right? Like, I mean, he's not saying literally like the protozoa is concerned like consciously, right? Kind of, right? But to be alive is to have concerns, is to be such that there is a way things can go wrong, and to be actively attempting to avoid things going wrong.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And so for him, this is a very Heideggerian move, right? He learned this from the boss, I think, right? Is to be alive, right, is to be concerned. Like mortal concern is a very aspect of life itself, right? But then here's like the interesting move is he says, look, if it weren't for the possibility of our mortality, right, nothing would really matter, right? Right. It's like it's only because we can fail that it matters how things work out, right? There is no value to the rock, right? Because it doesn't, there's no success, there's no failure, right?
Yes.
It's only because we are subject to death, right? And thereby we have to like prosecute ourselves into the world somehow, right? That we can then say there's a better or worse for us.
Yes.
Right. That there is a value that like to some ways, and a negative value to other ways. It's only because there are stakes in the game for us, right?
Yeah.
It's because we have skin in the game of reality, right? As living things, that there can be any value at all.
That's really interesting. I wonder. Take Richard Swinburne, Jim. I don't know how much of his work you've read, but this actually sounds a lot about how Swinburne thinks about the value of freedom and morally significant choices. And in fact, I saw somebody had a question about divine hiddenness. It's part of how he responds to divine hiddenness and trying to avoid mercenary love and stuff like that. That there could be great goods in agnosticism because it puts the sort of skin in the game and the real value for truly significant moral choices. I'm just wondering maybe if Swinburne had crossed pages with
you wonder, or these are ideas in the air in the 20th century, right? Right. And so think of it now, like if you were not subject to death ultimately, right, what would count for better or worse? Right? Like, could we make sense of success or failure of a human life without the backdrop of the complete failure of it.
Without the symphony coming to an end.
Yeah, exactly. Or without the possibility of it coming to an end, right?
Yeah.
If we were naturally immortal, we would have no skin in the game for how things worked out, right? It's because we're mortal, we're invested in the world, like that we have a stake in this thing now, right? And that is the very condition for there being a meaningful life.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if I completely buy it yet.
Yeah.
I have to think about that.
Yeah. It's a heavy thought, man.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like, this is a problem I have. I wonder if you have it too. Like with the thing I brought up about the angels, like it's not great that like whenever I read anybody, friend or foe, I'm always like, I can think of a counterexample to that. Right? No, like sometimes I just have to tell myself, Pat, shut up and just let the guy speak, right? For 5 freaking minutes. Just let the guy speak, right? Yeah, no, that's interesting, right? So one thing that I agree with you on, Jim, and this was and maybe you picked this up from Jonas. This came out in our conversation with Gavin on immortality and a meaningful life, is I don't think you have to have immortality to have a good and meaningful life. I do agree with that. I think to have satisfactions of, say, perfect justice and stuff, you need an afterlife. But who's to say the afterlife has to be forever, right? Right? There could just be a temporary afterlife, right? It seems like we could satisfy certain conditions of justice, even without a sort of permanently enduring afterlife. So I don't think, maybe it's less with mortality than it is just finitude in general. Now, there's other considerations where I think, okay, maybe we do need to move beyond finitude when we start thinking about things like perfect friendship and perfect union and perfect love and perfect home. But certain categories like justice and meaningfulness, I think they're not incompatible with finitude, if that makes sense. Now, do you need finitude to have meaningfulness? That is a heavy thought that I have to think more about. You know what I mean?
Or like, and he doesn't do this in the essay, but I think this is like an important phenomenological distinction, right? Is not a distinction, like an account. Let's suppose I were naturally immortal, right? What time would I have gotten up this morning?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I probably wouldn't have gotten up at 5 a.m., right? Because
you can always put it off.
Sure. Always put it off. Yeah. Okay. Or, let's say.
Now, let me think about this, because here's the immediate counterexample I think of, and maybe it's not a good one. So I'll let you poke some holes at it, right? Say that Jim, because he's naturally immortal, decides not to get up at 5, and then he keeps doing that, and he keeps hitting Sonic for lunch. What was the favorite thing you used to get at Sonic?
Oh, the jalapeno chili cheese tater tots.
Yeah, so that becomes, because you can always lose the weight later, right?
Always lose it later. Yeah.
But could you then, following Aristotle, even if you're immortal, just get stuck in a sort of fixity of the will, where things really go wrong for all eternity, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, it seems like we still have a failure, even if you never die, or just because you can never reverse course, right?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, what I'm saying here is whatever you think about, whether or not you could have meaning without immortality, with immortality. What I'm saying is you wouldn't be one of us, because we structure things in terms of temporality, right? Like all human agency only makes sense at a backdrop of temporality, right? And thereby in a finite allotment of temporality.
I see. Right? So it would be one of those things like, okay, maybe there could still be skin in the game or meaning, but it wouldn't be in the way we obviously currently experience it.
Or I think what happened is if indeed we're naturally immortal, right? What I'm saying is the whole structure of motivation would go out the window for us.
Yeah, that's where I'm not convinced of that.
Yeah. Like, what would I be motivated to do?
Yeah, because I guess the Aristotelian in me would say, well, I would still think I would be motivated to try and be an excellent instantiation, right? Because I still think I would want to pursue my happiness, right? And that's going to require certain dispositions. You see how I'm thinking about that, right?
But I mean,
why would that motivation immediately be gone?
Yeah. Well, the point is you'd have infinitely many chances to get it right. So like the stakes on any one try are pretty low.
Yeah. I guess I'm thinking that there is a
Yeah.
possibility of fixity.
Yeah.
So maybe if we get rid of that, you see, like, maybe somebody could get into such a corrupt state, right?
Yeah.
That there's no pulling yourself back out of that aside from maybe some divine intervention.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, all right. So I see what the thing is. The thing is skin in the game, right? That's
Yeah.
the thing. So
Or
I'm just
yeah.
replacing the skin in the
Yeah.
game with temporal duration with something like fixity. You see that? Like, no,
I
you
guess
could
I don't understand what I don't understand what you mean by that.
like can put things off if you
Mhm.
think you're immortal because you think you could always reverse course. I'm
Yeah.
saying, well, what if you can't always reverse course, even if you're immortal?
Oh, you're saying like you realize like that you could cross a line, right?
Yes.
Yeah, sure. I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's an interesting question. Or like here's the other way to look at it. Let's say, does my wife's promise, right, to give me like like, give me 50 years of her life, what might work out to be 50 years of her life, right? Um, is that the same thing if we're like naturally immortal?
Oh yeah,
Like
that's a good one.
what's commitment look like for an immortal, right?
Yeah, that's a good one,
Do you
right?
see what I mean?
That's
Right,
that's a
right.
good one, right?
You know what I mean? You
Yeah.
know?
So, okay. So let's keep moving forward here.
Yeah,
This is what, of course, I love.
yeah,
Like our show is just a conversation, right? So
yeah,
we put ideas on the table. We try to examine them. I'm not convinced of his view, but
right,
I'm also not convinced of it, right? It's just
right.
something I want to
Well,
look at a
I
little bit
guess
more.
going back to okay, so do you agree that like a necessary condition for organic life is mortality?
I think that anything. I mean, I'm a traditional scholastic. I think that anything material is by nature corruptible, right?
Yeah,
So I think I can follow Jonas on that.
yeah, but I
Yeah.
mean, like, but a scholastic doesn't necessarily think the elements are corruptible, right?
Mm.
Like corrupt, naturally corruptible.
Yeah, in a sense they do though, right? So let's just yeah, I'm
I mean,
willing to
like save the like God's retraction of the creative act, right? The even a scholastic wouldn't say the elements are corruptible, right?
I don't want to commit to that because you might I think you might be right on that one. But
Right. Because
let's
like what the elements are the thing that like you can't. There's nothing below them, right? That they can be broken into,
right, yeah,
right? So
the problem is I'm thinking in terms of scholasticism and how we think of the elements today, but they obviously thought
yeah,
of elements differently than that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, like for them, the elements would be like whatever the most fundamental particle is,
Yeah. So
right?
let's grant it. Let me grant
Yeah,
that because I think I very much more would be on board with the thesis that anything that is an organism just sort of just to be an organism just means that things could go wrong and you could
right,
die, right? It
right.
includes the
Exactly,
possibility of death.
exactly.
Yeah,
Right,
that's not what I'm
right.
pushing back against.
And do you agree though too that if there weren't organisms, right, you would be in a fundamentally like valueless universe. Like there would be something lacking in terms of
It
like
would be a
just the
worse
presence
world.
of value. A worse
Oh,
world,
yeah, it
right?
would be
Yeah,
a worse world for sure,
yeah.
right? Yeah, no, I
Or
completely
but
agree with
I'm gonna
that.
go even further. Like
Mhm.
it would be a fundamentally aethical world.
Yes, yeah.
Do you see what I mean? Right. And so you can only then have value in that sense, in as much as you're dealing with mortal beings.
Yes. Okay. So, all right. This is clarifying. This is helpful, right?
Do you see
So,
what I mean?
the this is a good exercise
Yeah.
in trying to think in like two different schools of thought at once. You see what I
Yeah.
mean, right? Because this is obviously a phenomenological school, which I'm far less familiar with.
Yeah.
And so, like, when you say value to me, I'm always defaulting to Aristotle and just
Yeah.
thinking of the good, right?
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, in a world where there's no organisms, there's still whatever degree of goodness from even the things that exist, right?
Mhm.
But it's far less good in the great chain of being
Yeah, but I mean,
than
but even like can like inorganic, elements be benefited or harmed?
no. So
They
if
can't.
if we're
Yeah.
thinking of value as a sort of moral enterprise, then I think that's right. Without without organisms online that can have, as you say, a concern, then I think value understood in the more traditional sense would not be there.
Right. You see what I mean? And so I think he is right that the price of value, right? And all that. I mean, I would
is death.
prefer
That's his
is
thesis,
death,
right?
is
Yeah.
death. Yeah, I think in the price of there being meaning, right, in that sense, is death, right? Or I should say, beings subject to death, right? Even if they don't ever die, that's
Yes.
you know what I mean. Like, there's another question there, right? But it's being subject to death, right?
Yeah, I think that I do think that I think that's right, because anything that isn't I'm going to go back to just metaphysics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I obviously think that even the elements are corruptible by nature, right? Anything that is an act potency sort of composite.
But see, I'd be careful there, like corruptible by nature. Well, it's not natural that elements corrupt. I agree with you that on the scholastic view, elements are still dependent on the creative act of God, right? But it is not in their nature to corrupt.
Given their nature, they're just never going to naturally go out of existence, right?
Yeah, but it's not even just never, like as a matter, it's just never so going to happen, right? The only way they could be gotten rid of would be for God to just rescind their act of existence,
right?
You know what I mean?
Like
whereas for you and I, we can fall apart into the elements.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. So let me tie that. What was the point we were just talking about previously, right before that? Because I wanted to.
Oh, whether or not you would have an A-valued universe or a meaningless universe if there weren't organic beings.
And the point you made was that even if they never die, at least the possibility is online there, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that seems right to me. That seems right to me. So it's not that because to just bring in some theology now, even Adam and Eve were going to die, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's traditionally understood, right, that they would have had a natural death even if they never sinned or something like that, right? And it's certainly consistent that even if something could die through, say, divine intervention or something, or grace, right, it could be so preserved. But just given the nature of this particular thing, let me know if this is right. At least the possibility of its death always comes online, right?
Yep.
If that thing comes online, yes, that seems right to me. Yep.
Yep. Okay, so here's what Jonas does. So he's got that. Suppose he's got that in place, right?
Yeah.
Like, so why is there death? Because there's life, right? Okay. Why is there the constant possibility of ultimate failure? Because that's the only way there can be ultimate success, right?
Got it.
Okay. Then his next move is say, well, look, okay, is it good for the species, right, that there be death, right? And he makes this point, well, yeah, because look, he gives a couple of reasons. First, like, one generation just has to get out of the way of the next generation. You see what I mean? Like, I mean, just using like really easy examples, like if I kept my job to infinity, then no one else gets it.
Yeah.
Right. And there is a limit to our reproductive, like how much of us can be tolerated, right, by the earth. I think we're far short of it, right? Do you know what I mean? Or any animal, there has to be a limit on how many of them it will dump into its environment, because otherwise it'll destroy its environment in the process, right? Okay, so it seems like there is scarcity. It's a fact, right? And there has to be, because otherwise there'd be no value, right? And so it does seem like the older generation is going to have to check out for the sake of its offspring at some point, right? Okay. All right. And so like there's a fundamental non-selfishness built into this that is our mortality, right? That ultimately what my job is to get the next round off and then get out of their way, right?
Right.
Another point Jonas makes, which I think is fascinating, is if like the prior generation has to give way to the younger generation at some point, because we need novelty to keep things going forward. Like just thinking evolutionarily, evolution works in an interchange between stability and novelty, right?
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
and he's saying this goes on. This is not, and it goes on to the level of genetics, but also goes on to the level of culture too, right? That you have to have people around that will get old and keep things the same as what they were given, right? But the same token, if that's all you ever have, things
Then
stagnate.
right. Then you never get the inventions and
Yeah, you never get the next thing. Okay, and so like at some point, I'm gonna become like old and outdated, right? And it's my job now to get the hell out of the way so someone else can think of something new, right? Now it
right.
can't just be just new, so we got to keep the old around long enough, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
I think that's a fascinating idea,
So
right? Yeah.
how is he thinking about this, right?
Mhm.
Because I like all that, right?
Yeah.
I like all that. Is he thinking about this like? Is he thinking about it theologically? Is like he trying to give like a sort of divine psychology of why God created the world this way, or is he just like trying to
Yeah.
give a descriptor? Like what is the perspective he's taking on this? Help me understand that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like in these in his essays on like human nature and this sort of thing, he does not talk much theologically, right?
Yeah.
He has theological work, right? I mean,
Because
the
that
name of the
sounds
book is
like a
God.
theodicy. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. I mean, the name of the book is God After Auschwitz,
Oh yeah,
right? That's the
yeah. Uh-huh.
subtitle of the book, right?
Right,
Is
yeah.
God After
Very
Auschwitz?
yeah,
Yeah,
and I
right.
haven't read that book, but I know that is a very well-known book. Uh-huh.
Well, yeah, no, it's like this, like the morality and mortality, a search for God after Auschwitz, right?
Yeah.
So there's and I haven't read the essay yet in there. But he has an essay on God after Auschwitz.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think there is something like a theodicy in here, right?
Even if he's not explicit about it.
Not explicit about it, right?
Yeah.
And I think he thinks that job is harder now after Auschwitz. Okay, but I think there is
Right.
a theodicy in
There's
there,
a
right?
reason
And
that
yeah,
that's what people point to with the
yeah,
problem of evil, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's but I think one of the things, if you want to say, hey, God, why the hell do I have to die? Because you got to give the kids your world.
Yeah.
You got to let
Uh-huh.
them inherit the earth, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
You
Uh-huh.
see that, okay? And I think he's seeing that there's a sort of like self-giving the older generation has to give to the younger generation, all the way to the grave, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, opportunities for real. So I would at least say this, that even if I thought meaning could be had without mortality, I think
yeah,
certainly the points he's making is that we have a deeper meaning with it and
yeah.
opportunities for more meaning with it.
Yes,
I think
yes,
that'd be the claim I'd like
yes,
minimally. That seems totally right. Right.
yes, yes, right. So you can see where this is going. Like okay, so now we've got these offers through transhumanism, through genetic engineering, through cyborg extensions, all this stuff that we could maybe make ourselves naturally immortal, right?
Right.
Okay,
RoboCop, baby.
yeah, and that's happening at the same time where people are having fewer and fewer kids,
Hmm.
right? And so what's the idea? Like some generation is going to say we're the last generation of humans and we're going to hang around forever, right?
Wow. Yeah. See, I
Right?
haven't looked much into the
Yeah.
transhumanism stuff. Is that an explicit goal of anybody? Do you know? Or
I
is
don't
that
know if
just
that's been said aloud, but it's in there, right? I think it's in between the lines, right?
yeah, yeah.
We could just stop reproducing, and like this current generation
Right,
will be
like
the last one.
we're the elites. We got this down.
Yep.
Let's not let anyone come in to mess it
No one
up.
else. Yeah. And
I
so
could
think
totally see that.
yeah.
Right.
And so think of it like there's two things I'll say about that. Is one, I think it will it because I think mortality is a condition of meaning. It would render my life meaningless, right?
Hmm.
It would like the very because like what do I need to be a living being? I need to have needful freedom, right? But if suddenly I'm immortal, there's no need, right? If there's no need, there's no real freedom. There's no risk. There's no stake in my life anymore, right?
Right. Hmm.
Okay. Secondly, that's the most damn selfish thing you could ever do to say we'll be the last generation.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
It's a completely self-obsessed narcissistic view of the world to think, yeah, no, I'll just make me immortal rather than passing on being to someone else. I'll just make my being immortal. Right.
Right. I'll take it for myself. I'll
Yeah.
deny it of others.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, of course
Right.
that's
Yeah.
incredibly childish and selfish.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So if you ask me like why not transhumanism, right? Okay. because that transhumanism is clearly a project for immortality.
So yeah, we didn't really define it, but that's the
Yeah.
idea, right? It's
The
like
idea that we're going to achieve
post mortality, human
Yeah.
nature. We're gonna
Yeah.
figure out a way to make ourselves immortal, right?
to achieve immortality through a technological means, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, one, I think it would render us no longer living things, and thereby would be a kind of suicide, right?
Mm-hmm.
It would be a species suicide, right? Secondly, I think it would then it misses the absolute core of self-giving love, right, in the middle of human life, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
No, it's definitely not the proper target for
Right.
happiness, right? So
Right.
yeah,
And think of like what an incredible act of selfishness that would be, is to say, no, I won't, because like, how are you and I going to achieve immortality? By our contribution, right? Leaving aside like, like afterlife, but like our contribution to the human thing, right? And that contribution to the human thing is our kids, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or what we leave behind for the next generation. If someone just says, hey, it turns out we'll just be the last generation and we'll go on forever, you now have a completely selfish, utterly demonically selfish view of the world now.
Yeah, Andrew has a good comment. He says transhumanism is misanthropic. Do you agree with that?
Agree with it. I agree with it. Yeah, I agree with it. It's a destruction of humanity.
And Horseman says immortality within this temple frame of existence would be hell.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. No, I think I see that as
because
well.
like what do we think of? What do we think of as like hell in the Christian tradition? It's like complete separation from God and everybody else, and,
and the good. It's this sort of warped. You're like warped in on yourself, which is kind of what you just described.
That's what I'm describing. It would be hell in that sense. Like it's just me to infinity.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not so great. I shouldn't go to infinity. Right.
Yeah.
I should get the hell out of the way and hope that like Martha will do something better than I did.
Right. And do what you can to try and lay the conditions for her awesomeness.
For her awesomeness. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I guess part of the reason I'd never even looked much into transhumanism is it has always struck me as ridiculous and selfish and just one of those. But I guess this is something a lot of people take very seriously.
Yeah.
And that's kind of freaky.
And I would say to them, grow the F up, right?
Yeah.
And realize the world is not about you. Right. Right.
What is there like a major contribution in the transhumanist literature that you think would be worth recommending to listeners? To compare and contrast.
Yeah. Let me. Oh gosh, that's an interesting question. Most of what I'm getting on that is like references to it and other stuff, right?
Because you hear about it a lot on like on the semi-popular level, right?
Like Francis Fukuyama's book, Our Post-Human Future, right? Although he's not a transhumanist, and he wrote this like in like 2002 or something like that. Like this dude saw it, right? That's a pretty interesting text, right?
Yeah.
I believe Nietzsche is your first like explicit transhumanist, right? I mean, it's pretty clearly in The Will of Power. Like, this is what he has in mind, right? But there's a lot of like pretty good popular discussions of it out there. Just go to like any like web page dedicated to it. You'll see what they're talking about is we're going to make ourselves immortal and like the hell with any future generation. Right?
Wow. Yeah.
Because remember, humans are a blight on the earth, right? And we'd just be better if we just got it down to a few elite ones going to infinity, right?
Dudes, yeah. So this is like the other extreme of the camp. I forget the term now. Who are the people that just would want to just hit the nuke button on all human existence?
But here's the deal. What do they call them? Like extinctionists or something like that?
Something like that, right?
I think it's the same view. Like this was it. Which listener said it? But what transhumanism is misanthropic, man.
It is
hatred of humanity.
hitting the extinction button on human.
Yeah,
on what it means to be a human.
What it means to be a human. It is. You know, I have a blog on this about the technological apocalypse. Right. Yeah. This is it. Like transhumanism is mass human suicide.
Antinatalist. That's
antinatalist.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I like extinctionist too. That's
yeah.
We like the isms and the is.
Well, I think we could look at like transhumanists and antinatalists are species of the genus extinctionist.
that's good. Yeah, right? Extinctionist. Yeah, that's good.
Because they would both prefer that humanity, as it naturally is would cease to be.
We just would not be humans anymore. So however you cut it, you are hitting that eliminate button.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating.
And if you want to like think theologically about it, like what, hey, take this knowledge and you'll be like gods.
Well,
right?
that's what Jacob said here. He said transhumanism just seems to me like another Tower of Babel situation.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Right.
Right.
It is. Right.
Nothing new under the sun, huh, Dr. Jim?
Yeah. Vanity of vanities, man.
All right. So what are your before we take some questions in here? Any other thoughts either from that essay or in general about death and transhumanism?
But I here's the thing is I do think these ideas need to get into the mix, right? So, you know what I mean? So I encourage people to continue to think about this and talk about this and pick up some Jonas. I think is a good place to start on this.
Yeah, it's cool. I can now, thinking back to your problem with evil paper.
Boom. Yeah.
I can see how that thought was translated. That's cool.
Yeah.
Pays to be a generalist.
Yeah.
Pays to be, because you never know how your studies in one area might help you out with a project in another area, which is really cool.
This is how Jonas kind of gets out of epiphenomenalism is he said, like, look, we're always trying to figure out how do you start out with unconscious life and then like start assembling it to get consciousness out of it, right? And his point is no, to be alive is to be conscious. Right.
Yeah, right. There's
there was never a separate thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I certainly think that's right. Yeah. Awesome. All right, let's take some questions.
Let's do it, man. Yeah.
Brendan says Freaky Friday has a skull, y'all. I guess that was in the thumbnail today. So if you see me rubbing my head, and I have this awful head cold. So I went down to Baton Rouge, as you know, Jim. I was cured of every ailment. The climate, it cured me. I come back to Wisconsin.
You came back to Milwaukee.
And I'm just like wrecked, man. Like I can't breathe. I'm all foggy in the head. So if I look like an idiot, which I always do, but at least this time I have a reason.
I look like I feel like crap. It's because I feel like crap.
I feel like garbage right now. Yep. Yeah. All right. So forgive me there. We'll do the best. All right. Brendan says, I love that this question on the table. Do you guys have any views on divine hiddenness? Yeah, lots. I wasn't a full episode on this, but I was on John DeRosa's podcast responding to some atheist thing, and divine hiddenness was there was a presentation of divine hiddenness in there, so I give some of my current thoughts on that, but maybe we could talk about some of them now. Jim, what do you think?
Go for it. Did
you want to go first, or did you just want to
I've never really worked terribly hard on the divine hiddenness problem, right? So I have terribly formal thoughts on it, right? But yet I think one of the things that like may be underestimated by people who are impressed by the problem is just, well, if we wanted to manifest ourselves to ants, right? Okay, right. That is a very, very hard thing. If you want the ants, you want to let the ants know that you're there and you want to communicate something to them, right? Well, how are you going to do that? You can't write it on a piece of paper, right? Do you see what I mean? Like they're going to eat the paper, right? You can't, stand by them because they'll think you're a tree. Do you see? Like they're set up to do a fairly, simple set of things. Do you see that? Now, I know we're greater than ants, but like the story would be the difference between us and ants is infinitely smaller than the difference between us and God. Right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So exactly how easy would it be, right, to have a clear-cut manifestation of that to us?
Right. A lot of these issues, again, are just thinking about God in terribly anthropomorphic ways. First, thinking that God has obligations again. Also, one thing, let me highlight this, right? Because people will say that if God's perfectly loving, then there's going to be no non-resistant non-belief, or he would want to relate to us at all times. But that to me all seems terribly confused, right? Because to relate to God just is to participate in goodness, right?
Yeah.
So to love God is to will what God wills. What does God will? His own goodness. And in virtue of that, he wills the good of other persons. When you love other persons, you're relating to God in the most intimate way. There's no reason to think that needs to require an explicit cognitive state that God exists, right? So I want to say those considerations, which are just ripe within the classical theist tradition, completely undermine some of these critical assumptions of divine hiddenness. It also confuses Again, God's relation to the world and working with us according to our nature, which are social, rational, testimonial dependent creatures, right?
Yeah.
And that is a really good thing, the sort of social testimonial aspect of our lives and how that builds the moral communities and knits us together in ways that I think are critical later on as we join in the life of the Trinity. So I think once you stop being a baby about your theology, these are not problems, right? They're pseudo problems.
And I think you like really got into a wheelhouse that, you know, is important to me from a Phil Mind cog sci standpoint. Is like, well, one, human intelligence, even its abstractive element, is first and foremost social. It came online for social reasons. Okay. And like, if you really want to relate to a human, you get to know them socially, right? Not through like abstract reason. Okay, do you see what I mean?
Right.
And if we say, yeah, the way, like the best way for a being to show itself to us would be through abstract reason, is I think really to misunderstand how human reason actually works, right?
Right. And it would undermine our social aspects, right? If it was all like super individualistic like that, you're kind of making nonsense of human nature at that point, I would argue. And God isn't in the business of making nonsense of human nature.
And once again, as you know, is like important to me to see is like, look, most of what we believe is an implicit practical background, not at the foreground, right?
Yeah.
So, and what would be the best way to maintain your influence on our lives? It would be in that implicit background, not in the foreground, because the foreground doesn't really do a whole lot of work for us, right?
Yeah, that's good. So we're on this. We're definitely on the same page with this. Just thinking from from different angles on it. Yeah. Again, some of these things. Let me just make a general point. If if you're interested in like these kind of current philosophy of religion debates, I can't emphasize how helpful and fruitful it is to just do your homework of the deeper metaphysics, of the deeper tradition. Because if you do that, if you actually study the great thinkers and study the great traditions and try and get your philosophy of God straight and your metaphysics and your philosophical anthropology, if you try to do systematic philosophy, chances are you'll come up against one of these problems that people think is a big problem. And you'll just see, oh, yeah, that's just totally wrong. And here's why, right? You've got your philosophy of God confused. You've got your understanding of what a relationship with God is confused. You've got your philosophical anthropology confused. You've baked all these assumptions into an argument that certainly, again, I would say a well-informed classical theist would just totally reject it out of hand.
And I would even argue probably a lot of times you've got what the cognitive science of belief wrong, right? You've got, you know, like, you know, how humans actually function in the environment wrong. I think there's all sorts of like first order scientific stuff that's deeply misunderstood in these debates too.
Yeah. So if people want more on this, that's some of the ways I thought about. We mentioned Swinburne before. He's got a section on this and his existence of God. Michael Ray has got a whole book on it. It's good. A hidden gem on divine hiddenness that is more in line with the way I've thought about it is actually, and he is a hidden gem because a lot of people don't know of his work, Dr. Stephen Napier at Villanova. He's got a book on epistemology, which is great, but it includes some really just awesome insights of, just thinking about divine hiddenness. So just some extra resources there.
I would recommend Thomas Sello's The Natural History of Human Thinking as a great entry point into the social basis of human abstractive intelligence.
Awesome. All right, let's keep going through some questions. Andrew says, I have drank the figurative phenomenological Kool-Aid. I can see why Jim prefers that route compared to others, and I have a feeling he will do some phenomenology in answering transhumanism. Well,
do what we can,
you've got exactly that, right?
Andrew, when the new book finally comes out, man, you're gonna dig it. You're gonna dig it big time.
What's the update on that, good sir, on the book?
I've been assured that it's moving forward.
Okay, good.
I've been assured.
I've been assured of that with a number of my submissions and articles, and it's been. I've been assured of it, but I haven't seen it.
I've been assured.
Yeah. All right. Let's take one from Danny. It says, Jim, do you think it would even be possible for us to reach a point where death for an individual can be postponed indefinitely? And if so, do you think it will actually happen?
Okay, I'm going to kind of a higher order answer that question. I think, no, it's not possible because I would cease to be an individual then. I would cease to be a human individual if that happened, right? Because I think my individuality is wrapped up in the temporal structure, right? That includes mortality as part of the temporal structure. Okay. But now I think what you're asking is like, as a matter of engineering, could we
pure technological?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know, but a lot of people seem to think that something like that is possible, right?
Right. Yeah, I have no
know.
idea.
And I know this, if it came on offer to me, I would not do it.
Neither would I.
I would not do it.
Yeah, right. That's a good thing. Like, would you do it, gentle listener?
Yeah.
Would you? It's kind of like a Nozick thought experiment too.
Yep.
It's like Vanilla Sky. Have you seen Vanilla Sky?
I've not.
It's a movie I actually prefer philosophically to The Matrix. It's got similar themes where you can essentially just put your body in a capsule and experience like the perfect life, but it's all, of course, fake, right? And Tom Cruise is in it. I thought it was a good movie. The critics, I don't think, thought it was a great movie, but I often disagree with the critics.
Yeah, fair enough.
Tasteless, lowbrow Philistines that they are.
Right.
But like, I think it's like, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't take the immortality pill or have my consciousness uploaded to a hard drive or whatever people were saying. Like, even if that was a possibility offered to me, wouldn't do it. He says, Jim, what are your thoughts on the Neuralink microchip being developed by Elon Musk? Do you think it or something else could ever fundamentally alter human rationality? Have you heard about this?
Yes,
Jim?
I have. Yeah,
I have not. So you'll have to catch me up.
Yeah, well, Musk is apparently like actively developing an implant, right? Or he says he is, right? That would allow something like telepathic communication, right? And but also like think of the possible abuses of that in terms of like being tracked like through your phone, but like directly into your thoughts and stuff like that. Okay. No, do I think it could ever fundamentally alter human rationality? It's an interesting question because I'm increasingly open to, because of some evidence on this sort of thing, that indeed we do have a telepathic gear naturally. Okay.
We got a weak power there, eh, Jim?
Yeah. Or at the very least, it seems maybe it was more of a thing for us at one point in our history, and it's less so now, right?
I think that's totally correct, by the way.
Yeah. Like, okay. As you know, I've gone full woo in the last couple of years, so I don't. I'm pretty much all for it. Okay, and so it could be like something Neuralink would actually help restore something of ours, right? Okay, that's interesting, right? But what I worry about with something like Neuralink is to what degree is it going to is it like the ultimate move for surveillance capitalism? Right. Okay. That's what I worry about with it.
Yeah, I'm saying no to that as well.
Yeah, I would say no to that. Now, if I thought we could trust ourselves not to turn it into a means of social control, and if it was like kind of a restorative measure to like help us recover our originally like
telepathic abilities.
Yeah, that would be interesting to me, right? It'd be like the paleo diet of the mind, right? Okay. Right.
That would be, you get grains out of your diet and you start getting telepathy back.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or you get Neuralink, right? It'd be interesting in that way, but I just think for us, it's going to turn into like one more piece in this surveillance capitalist nightmare we live in, right?
Yeah, that would be my concern as well. Take probiotics, get telepathy. Barry says it would be interesting to have Jim in conversation with a prominent transhumanist. Barry, if you know of one, we would certainly be happy to host them on this show. I don't know any prominent transhumanists, so
it's a big place, right?
It's a big place. All right, let me scroll back up here. Oh man, sorry, I have to cough.
Horseman mentions that Jonas has a great book on Gnosticism. I've heard of that. I have not read his stuff on Gnosticism. I think his dissertation was actually on Gnosticism. Yeah, so that's interesting.
Interesting, very interesting. Joshua says, are you all debating becoming like RoboCop or something that is all mechanical, right? First off, it still like surprises me that people have decided to continue making movies as if RoboCop doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, why are we still doing this? It's all been done.
Right. It's done. It's done. Right. The peak of cinema has been reached.
Exactly. Right.
I'll let you have RoboCop 2, maybe.
Maybe.
I told you, man. I actually love like dystopia cyberpunk. It's one of my favorite themes. Even though I think all this stuff is exceedingly ghoulish, it just I don't know. It appeals to that to the nihilistic side of me, I guess.
Yeah. Hey, can you mind if I jump to a question here?
Please.
Horseman, this is a good question. Like Horseman, I'm not sure if this is the case, but if Jonas is a phenomenologist, isn't he talking how meaning and death exist for us? Okay. Well, one quick, I want to take that question head on, but I want to make a caveat first. Is that relationship between existing for us and things existing in themselves, like kind of epistemology versus metaphysics, that itself becomes a question of phenomenology, okay? And like to what degree there really is a distinction there, and to what degree like a lot of phenomenologists, especially like Merleau-Ponty, are trying to dissolve that very worry, okay? But I do think there's something to that. Like phenomenologists do begin with an examination of experience, okay? It's interesting in Jonas, like the question of the degree to which he's proceeding phenomenologically is an interesting question, and he even says that at times in many of his works. He'll say, I still think I can help myself to metaphysics, and he still claims to be doing metaphysics, right? I think he's taking insights like the primacy of concern in structuring human life, right, that he's learned phenomenologically, and now seeing what that shows him metaphysically in like another realm, right? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Josh says, look at how many times our software gets a virus and the blue screen of death results. People just haven't reached the point of excellence required to make an artificial brain. Yeah, I remember I had an Xbox years ago that got the red ring of death. So I guess if you're trying to turn me into something like that, I might be a little bit concerned of its reliability.
Exactly.
But I mean, the presumption is that wouldn't be a problem, right? That we would really have the technological efficiency to actually achieve an everlasting state of existence, right? Yeah. So I mean, you just have to, I grant for the sake of argument that you wouldn't have to worry about like technical malfunctions or something like that. By the way, if anyone is interested in learning more about phenomenology, what Terrence Malick? Oh, I think asking for a film recommend. Oh, he's saying watch Terrence Malick. Watch Terrence Malick. Yeah.
Yeah. Or one thing I like that suggestion, Andrew, but this is something I have to remind myself all the time on is like, if Terrence Malick wanted to do phenomenology, he could have stayed at MIT and finished the PhD, right? You see what I mean? Like I tend to like forget that there is something of a rejection of academics and like formal philosophical inquiry in Terrence Malick, because he walked out on that. Do you see what I mean? And I'm not saying he's wrong to do it, right? And so whatever Terrence Malick is doing is brilliant, but it's also not something that we can think of as just phenomenology on film, right? Or you know what I mean? And I tend to do that. I tend to over-interpret it, right? Okay. And he made a conscious act to enter the aesthetic realm, right, rather than the formally philosophical realm, right? But that being said, I do think he is bringing phenomenological insight to bear in his films. Definitely agree, Andrew.
Speaking of Malick, Mark just said, I watched Tree of Life on Hulu, but the ads oddly took away from and added to the film.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Just drop the money and rent it on Amazon. Right.
Yeah. For an experience like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably want it to be uninterrupted, right? Yeah.
That's great.
So it's like popping obnoxious ad for Applebee's comes up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Right. That's awesome.
All right, let's do one or two more here. Samuel says, question about Book 10 of the Republic and Marcuse. Is Plato's point with the myth of that the truly just will be able to come out on top despite arbitrary circumstances? To me, it seems that Marcuse is directly challenging this claim and positing that there are indeed forces that prevent some people from coming out on top, the machine, systemic racism, etc.
Yeah, well, I think I don't think Plato is saying that we should be optimistic about how things are going to go in this world for the truly just, right? I mean, it's very clear in the cave analogy that when the philosopher attempts to return to the cave, he can expect nothing but to be torn to shreds by the crowd, right? Mm-hmm. You see that? So I think what he's saying, though, in much of the myth of is that the truly just are in a way immune to the vicissitudes of life, not because they're not going to be torn up by the crowd, right? But because it won't really matter to them, right? That they are oriented to something else now, right?
Good. Yep. I'm satisfied with that one, right? All right, Jim. Before we wrap up here, what else are you working on? It's been like 2 or 3 weeks since we got.
I know, yeah. From you, man. So I'm gonna I have spring break here, so I'm going to continue the UFO research. So that's
excellent. We should
excellent.
do an update. We should do an episode on that.
Yeah. I'm right now. I've been reading a lot of stuff by a very interesting guy named Jacques Vallée. Okay, who, man, very, very, very interesting guy, a scientist, and I think a guy of a philosophical bend, who has written many books going back to the 60s on the topic, and looking at it from like a psychological, cultural, anthropological view. Very interesting. Other than that, I've been doing a pretty systematic study of several works by Carl Jung, right? Just kind of for kicks, right? Yeah, and other than that, just teaching and grappling. Right?
Awesome. So with spring break here now, I suspect we'll be able to continue our series with Aristotle, right? So get ready, gentle listeners. If you have not hit the subscribe button, definitely do that, because we will be back here very soon, and we're going to keep marching through the long march through Nicomachean ethics and the politics. So smash that like button, headbutt the subscribe button, back kick the share button.
Excellent, man. Thanks.
We'll see you guys on the next episode.
Armbar me on Twitter.